Peace. Here we are for part 2, the present sky of the element map. We're going to go deeper into biodynamic time. So I'm going to jump right in. The element starts. We discussed creation stories in the time map series. Now we bring it into the elements. Science calls it the Big Bang. I explain the element sequence starting as a celestial ring of ether that was drawn into the cosmic fire of the universe. The cycle of the main constellations begins with fire. All birth begins with being a baby, right? Such is the youngest version or pattern of expression. And when we bring the elements into a time continuum of growth, we can understand their sequence. It goes from fire to earth, and then to air, and then to water, which repeats 2 more times until full maturation. In the Taoist creation cycle begins with wood, which I equate with ether, which creates fire, fire creates earth, earth creates metal, which I call air, metal creates water, and water creates wood again, and around and around. I share a story from a colleague of mine, Palma Vazzoni. She studied with a specific African people known as the Dagara. And in their tradition, they tell us the element sequence starts with the unnameable. So here I will name it. I will name it ether for the sake of this conversation. Then the spark of fire. Next, fire collides with water. They meet and cool to become mineral. This forms the bones of the earth, which ferments and metabolizes into soil and nature. Earth is below the ground, and nature is above the ground. Air cannot be contained and is the holy breath. Did you notice the similarities? Well, I sure did. And so this really brought me all the way into ether as the origin. It speaks volumes to me as we merge the idea of the unnameable into nature. Bridging spirituality and biology is at the heart of integration of your daily life lessons with a holy purpose of divinity. It's that part of you that wants more than just living. And so, for the sake of this curriculum, ether is the origin element. And you may notice a disparity when I explain the start of the zodiac wheel as a fire sign. However, as I will share later, there's another constellation that is recognized, and this is Cetus. It's the ancient whale's song that becomes the etheric start of our collective cycle on Earth, and it's all about belonging, and I can't wait to tell you that story. But first, before I get into this layer and how it makes sense when we move into our sun map, I want to explain and clarify that in the biodynamic approach, it doesn't include ether in the almanac as a distinct element because it's actually a part of all the elements. Okay, so heat ether is what fire is in the fruit, and light ether is in air or flower. Chemical ether is water, which we find in leaf, and then life ether is in earth, which we see in the root. So I have an inherent calling to give ether spaciousness. And so I'm going to continue into diving into that more later. But for the sake of gardening and the first layer of the element map, here are the main 12 constellations that influence plant growth in the 4 elements, right? We have fire, which is Aries, Leo, Sagittarius in the order of maturation. We have earth, which is Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn. Air is Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius, and water is Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. Let's go deeper. We're going to simplify this as much as possible. So we're going to compare 2 wheels. There's the astrological or tropical wheel, and then there's the astronomical or sidereal wheel. And so most people are familiar with the astrological or tropical calendar because it's utilized in Western astrology, as you can read your horoscope in common places. And some people are familiar with astronomy from visiting a planetarium or viewing the night sky. So let's learn the difference. These are the 3 main differences between these wheels. First is the Aries start date. Both wheels do agree the zodiac starts with Aries, the fire that ignited the story, though I add Cetus to account for the present sky revealing this etheric constellation of origin. Then there's the size of the constellation. One is 30 degrees versus their actual stars that make up the constellation. And the other is how many constellations. So there's 12, 13, or even 14. So the difference between the sidereal wheel, which is 12, and then the true sky wheel, which adds Ophiuchus, which is 13, and then the present sky, which adds both Ophiuchus and Cetus for 14. So let's start from the top, the Aries start date. In the astrological or tropical wheel, this calendar, its reference is the position of the sun with the Earth's horizon. So this is how the seasons are calculated, right? Its start date is based on spring equinox. That's when Aries begins, fixed at 0 degrees. And so this is always about March 19th, 20th, or 21st. You can go ahead and look. And I've done a bunch of research on this. Equinox is a 3-day event. For these 3 days, the sunrise and the sunset are about balanced, right? At either spring or fall, depending upon your hemisphere here, is where that's going to play out. But an astronomical or the sidereal wheel, which includes true sky, the sidereal wheel is what the astronomers use, the Vedic astrologers use, the biodynamic farmers. And this is established based on the stars as the background in reference to the position of the sun, not the horizon and us looking out. Okay. So the biodynamic perspective takes this grounded look at the celestial sky from the viewpoint of the earth, the stars at the background. Since we live on Earth, not the sun, it seems logical to consider our location in the universe as a collective point of reference, and not just for plant growth on the Earth, but for personal inner growth, right? So Aries begins when the constellation of Aries is visible in the sky. And this changes every year, but it is around April 18th, which is about a whole month later. Okay, once both wheels were consistent. However, over the course of time, the western wheel has fallen out of sync with the visible sky, 1 degree every 71 years. This is due to what's called precession. And Western astrologers know this, and they don't talk about it as much, but they do know it, right? And so this movement has added up over 2,000 years plus to be a full constellation most of the time. And so from this, we can determine the two wheels are about a sign off. So I did the math, 2,025 divided by 71 is 28.52. So if you're looking at a sign being 30 degrees, that would be a sign, right? So let's talk about that next. The size of the constellations. This is a big deal because now we're going to separate Western astrology and Vedic astrology from the rest of the crew. They divide constellations into equal sizes, both of them. They decide everything is 30 degrees. So in this picture, you can see the inside wheel, all of them are the same size. In the outside wheel with the sidereal wheel and true sky wheel, all of them are not the same size. So you can see in this picture, Virgo is much larger than Libra. So where a constellation starts and stops has to do with the stars that are connected to it. And the sidereal and the true sky wheel honor that the constellations vary sizes in different degrees. Okay. And 1 degree equals 1 day. That was a really helpful calculation for me. So I'm going to share that too. When the sun, the moon, or the earth pass through a constellation, they aren't there for equal amounts of time. That makes sense, right? It is what it is. So there's this 30-degree myth, I call it, because look how nice this is. If 12 signs were easily divided into 30 degrees, it is mathematically a composite number divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12, right? Shows up in the tropical zodiac story as 12 signs laid out into 12 months and even 12 hours for a day and 12 hours for a night. Although it made for a neat, easy system, alas, it is not aligned with what's really happening in the actual sky. I'm not saying you have to adopt this, but this is what's going on, okay? So the next distinguishing difference is that sidereal has 12 signs. The biodynamic calendar has 12 signs. They don't use 13. True Sky has 13. And I really feel like this removal, the 13th sign was in there in Egypt, and you can go to pyramids and you can see Ophiuchus written in. But this is part of that eradication of knowledge and keeping people from their unique blueprint. And why? Because it's tidy. I call it the tidy 12. 12 split into 4 seasons, which create 4 seasonal calendars of 3 months each. They all end and begin a new constellation around the 21st of the month. All nice and controlled, and I enter perhaps to keep you nice and controlled on their time clock to work for them in factories, not agrarian, right? You're not farming and you're not traveling or migrating around. This is very much about keeping you tidy. And I love tidiness, don't get me wrong. But I do notice that there is a lot of egos during this time, 2,000 years ago, which I talk about in the time map chapter and sessions, that are really at play here around ownership and making sure there's some fiscal revenue going on for certain people. So, is this just a numbers game? I'm going to enter some archetypal numbers here. This is the arc. The 12th card in tarot is called the Hangman. The 13th is the Death card, which ends the cycle in this way. And it's also the potential of the process of healing through forgiveness. The 14th number is Temperance, to restore our birthright and inheritance of miracles. It's the elevation of the mundane to the spiritual again, and our collective return to oneness with our Creator. When we include more factors, our math changes. And in the gate system that I use, the number 9, to shift this looping story of 4 seasons divided into 8 parts by adding a 5th season, which correlates with the 13th month for purification and peace. So yes, I advocate returning to a 13-month calendar. I observe the sun, the moon, the earth, and planets as they move through the constellations to restore original wisdom. The lunar monthly calculations illustrated so beautifully on the back of a turtle aligns with a biological woman's body clock. Women are the natural timekeepers. It's their menses cycle when they're the mothering age. And when you look at the size of Virgo, it really illustrates this collective instruction to honor and heal with the Divine Mother on planet Earth. Anyway, back to astronomy and Babylon. I am certainly not the first to propose change. Within the 20th century sidereal astrology movement, the idea was also taken up by Walter Berg. He wrote a book in 1995 called The 13 Signs of the Zodiac. And he goes deep into the Babylonians inventing this constellation series 3,000 years ago, choosing to leave out that 13th sign. So NASA astronomers did the math, and here's an excerpt from them. What did they say? They said the constellations are different sizes. They're not all 30 degrees and different shapes. And so the sun spends different lengths of time lined up in each one. The line from Earth to through the sun points to Virgo for 45 days, but points to Scorpio for only 7. This depends on how you calculate those stars again. But it's tidy, right? Their math is tidy with this 12-month calendar that they created. And so the Babylonians ignored the fact that the sun actually moved through more constellations. They just assigned the 12 because it was about equal number of time for their calendar. So the beauty and simplicity of the visible sky is that you can look up with your naked eye or a telescope if you're adept at astronomy, and you can use a sky app today to determine where the sun, the moon, and the stars are at any given time. So let's take a nice deep breath into the expansion of who and where you are here and now. Because all of the universe can be used to wake us up or as idols. The intention of how to use the stars is critical, and I use them as symbols to awaken in your life purpose. In your chart reading, you can dissolve the myths, roles, and stories placed upon you. You can offer forgiveness and let down the offense-defense game. This is how you restore peace. So let's talk about restoring Ophiuchus first. So when you look at a sky app, you can see the esoteric wisdom of what's in plain sight. The most overlapping constellations are that of Scorpio, Ophiuchus, and Sagittarius. So they're very, the stars that delineate the end or the beginning of a constellation is not agreed upon here. I will say that. So I measure Scorpio as 11 degrees. Once it moves past Antares, that star, and I call that, now it's in the constellation of Ophiuchus, which I measure at 19 degrees. And then I measure Sagittarius as 32 degrees. So you can see what feels real for you. So interestingly, in the biodynamic calendar, Scorpio is actually a 30-degree window. seen as a month of Scorpio, a water sign, because each degree, again, is equal to about a day. So the Scorpio window of 11 days is a rather short window of time in the sun's calendar when you include Ophiuchus as a separate sign, because, like I said, I read Ophiuchus for 19. But for me, I also noticed with the moon, it moves through Scorpio in 20 hours and Ophiuchus in 37. So these are details, and they don't necessarily influence plant growth as a gardener. You can use the whole thing as a water window and refrain from gardening for the latter part if you'd like to. It's really up to you. What's fascinating for the purpose of this curriculum is what energy patterns are available for supportive inner growth work. And that's what I'm here to illustrate. The duration of the constellations have different lessons. And so I give them their own time and space. I don't want to be in Scorpio for very long personally, but you can enjoy whatever feels good to you. And so many people have advocated for change again, but this main 12 have held their place. So are you open to Ophiuchus? And I'm going to expand on the patterns of this sign much later in my book, but I will share it is an evolved sign. And if you're ready to embrace sharing miracles in humanity, you may want to consider checking it out. Because we have one more constellation to bring into the script. In 1970, you'll notice that was before the last person I quoted, Stephen Schmidt, in his Astrology 14, advocated a 14 sign zodiac. He noted Ophiuchus and Cetus as additional signs. So I resisted for a while, but I could no longer ignore the influence of Cetus, the great whale, mostly because my daughter has a lot in this. And so it's a large constellation, and the whale's tail actually crosses the ecliptic after Aquarius and before Pisces. You can see in the picture there, the whale's tail. And currently that's 8 days, and it's lining up right before spring equinox in the northern hemisphere and right before fall equinox in the southern hemisphere. So Cetus is then mostly below Pisces as the sun moves into Aries, which is about April 18th, depends on what's going on each year, but Cetus's head is significant to note again. And so that's the picture on the other side. One is of the moon and one is of the sun there. Once the sun passes the star Menkar at Cetus's mouth, you can see that in the picture, its influence is pretty complete. And this is around the 3rd of May, giving this energy to Aries on May 4th. So if someone has placement here, I do note this watery etheric influence of Cetus. And in the Element Map workbook and the Sun Map journal, I go way more into detail about the qualities and patterns of Cetus. Its influence is profound as an etheric origin story. I also find it interesting that 2 water signs, Scorpio and Pisces, can expand, just like our emotions, to include more divine information. Who doesn't want to bring more divinity into our emotions, right? And so Scorpio is enhanced and it gets to evolve by including Ophiuchus. Pisces is enhanced and gets to involved in the inclusion of Cetus. Cetus also adds to Aries and the start of our zodiac wheel. So although I don't find either Ophiuchus or Cetus are necessary for plant growth consideration in the biodynamic calendar, I do for individual and collective pattern work. Hence, God has guided me into the expansion and timings I have articulated, thus honoring the 14 constellations and 5 elements. If you want to restore Ophiuchus and Cetus in the constellation rhythm of the moon, it can correlate to the gray timings of no farm action in the biodynamic gardening calendar. So what do I mean by that? Another gray timing is during eclipses. So I do include this in the energetic pattern of ether, but it's a very different energy from Ophiuchus or Cetus. Eclipses are always unfavorable for plant growth. So you'll see that in the biodynamic calendar. And I use these windows as times to come inside, to focus on love, to focus on gratitude, cultivate peace. It's crucial to not incite conflict or disturb the soil during this time. And I elaborate again on that in the workbook. But what I'm bringing in is this restoring your inner calendar to a 13-month system. And you get to choose, but adopting a 13th or 14th constellation may feel really good to you. I use the sun and the moon calendars as an external map to an internal landscape, and I illustrate the divine mathematics more clearly in the sun and the moon maps. When you consider the celestial placement in motion, you reorient your perspective. You can choose to change your individual pace and integrate your life experiences with a different goal than modern society offers you. Then you can slow down to receive what God has for you to hear. That divinity piece again. The goal is to be adept at listening. I honor the teaching of as above, so below. It translates to mean divine information from the heavens is received on earth and vice versa. So when you start to garden on the earth, you really feel this. Hearing your life instructions means you're meant for a holy function to express your cosmic contribution to the world. And by accessing the divine information the stars can transmit, you can make time for more connection, love, joy, and peace of mind. You can harness elemental energy as a form of support with daily activities. So I invite you to have a look. Don't take someone's word for it, and certainly question what version of reality an astrology chart is placing upon your perspective of yourself. But before you leave behind your tropical or Western astrology chart as your karmic past, you can reflect on it. How do your karmic patterns hold you in stories about yourself? What would you like to move out of? Because with the present sky, you get to move into your evolved chart. How can the visible sky offer presence and freedom to move toward and forward? You're invited to move into the present moment where all those miracles replace the stories. Here we are in the vertical time of the present. The overarching combination bridging the altar map and the element map is the integration of time. So if you switch to applying present sky astrology, but use it the same way that one can use Western astrology by noticing calculations and stories outside of yourself, then you aren't going to experience the transformation that happens through the present sky. I see this as part of the counterclockwise entrapment of those readings. Its karmic stories keep you stuck in the process, but never seem to reach the end of healing the behavior because it isn't eradicated at the level of the mind. And I address how I read charts and how you can too in another session. To bring this all home, I just want to remind you that you can transform the mundane to the cosmically ordained. The art of peace and intentional living is found in how you approach your daily tasks. So I made a tool for you to easily access and not be overwhelmed by charts. I compile information from the Biodynamic Almanac and the present sky each cycle, and I list the timings for you. So for each element, I share ways to connect with it in the world around you, because building cosmic connections from the divine universe can heal the adverse effects of stress. I give examples of how to move through the physical plane and access optimal flow with that to be list. And I offer you a way to connect with the element on your altar, thus integrating the element map for support. Above all, I want you to make this a personal practice. So if you're interested, there is a link for the Be Biodynamic digital calendar for our times. You get your daily view in the element map, and it tells you the biodynamic day element and when it changes to the next one. There's prompts, contemplations, meditations. There's a monthly view, which has the moon map tab and shares the moon phase and what to move forward with your life and passion projects. And then there is a seasonal view called the sun map tab. And this illustrates the wider perspective on how to align your time with the cosmic celestial movements. You can find my longer lists there. It's really when you bring these map practices together, experiencing integrated elemental cosmology. Yes, it involves action on your part. The more you interact with the element of the day, the more you will feel supported for personal growth. For example, if you have a Cancer moon sign, it will match a biodynamic moon water day as you harvest the mint from your garden and make tea. You're making choices on how to focus your mind and take aligned actions for your highest good. The Be Biodynamic app elaborates on the daily practices because this pedagogy is what facilitates your healing to end the past stories you've carried. Furthermore, it supports your connection to the heavenly creator. For now, I invite you into each element as a daily practice and not just in times of need, like I shared in my altar map. You can move on to the workbook or you can check out the app. I'm excited. You can also tune into how I read your charts or head to that workbook right now. Peace.